My name is Monica Curls. I'm currently the manager of government compliance at Terracon Consult Incorporated, which is an engineering firm, a national engineering firm that is headquartered out of the Kansas City area. But we have about 130 offices nationwide, and I deal with the government compliance. I have a 23-year history of either doing government contracting or working for the government. So I'm pretty deeply entrenched in that world.
Well, Monica, we are excited to have you with us this afternoon. So we have your slides pulled up. So just say next slide, and the floor is all yours.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monica Curls, and my journey from when I was first asked to give this speech until now is a perfect example of imposter syndrome and how to deal with it. In order to demonstrate this, what I'd like to do is, on the next slide, give you a definition of what is imposter syndrome. The term imposter syndrome, which was originally called imposter phenomenon, was first identified by psychologists Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes back in 1978 to describe an internal experience of intellectual phoniness in people who believed that they were not intelligent, capable, or creative enough despite evidence of high achievement. These thoughts of self-doubt can occur despite evidence to the contrary, such as high academic achievement, years of notable experience, developed skill sets, or demonstrable talent. Individuals can be overwhelmed with feelings of inadequacy, that voice in their head telling them that they're not good enough or that they're not worthy of the position or title that they hold. Imposter syndrome can be insidious because once you've gained notable achievements, people will give you additional opportunities by promoting you to higher and more visible positions. However, you might find yourself actually undermining those own achievements by doubting yourself and thinking yourself a fraud in situations where maintaining your self-confidence is desperately needed. Imposter syndrome can be particularly prevalent among women and people of color because we often find ourselves being the first or the only in positions of prominence. And we cannot always find the support we need to guide us through these new challenges because we are the first or the only in that position. We start comparing ourselves to other people in the room, particularly men in the room, and think to yourself that I don't have the experience, I don't have his degree, and immediately begin to think that our contributions will be lacking and that we are a fraud who don't deserve to be there. There's a specific cycle that a person goes through when they experience imposter syndrome, which we'll see on the next slide. First, you're given a new task, position, or title. Yay, go you. But now you start to, that next element of the cycle where you start to experience anxiety over those new responsibilities. That anxiety will cause you to either over-prepare and stress over every detail, or it'll cause you to procrastinate, thus almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of not being able to complete the task. Then, because you're a high achiever, you still are able to complete the project or task. Or if you're in a new position, you're able to excel in that position. And you experience a brief moment of satisfaction and sense of accomplishment. Yay, I knew you could do it. But then you start to listen to that inner voice again. And for most people, that voice is negative or critical. And you start to undervalue those achievements and not giving yourself the proper credit. You were just lucky. Someone else would have done better than you. That negative, critical inner voice contributes once again to that feeling of self-doubt, more anxiety, and greater feelings of being a fraud. And then, because you were successful, you get a new position, you get more responsibilities, additional tasks, and unfortunately that cycle starts all over again. Aren't we so lucky? Like I said before when I started the speech, this journey to get to this speech was an example of how imposter syndrome works specifically for me and how it played out. So I started, which I kind of outlined on the next slide. I started by getting contacted by the Kansas City Women's Leadership Summit to ask to write a speech. Woo-hoo, go me. But the anxiety immediately started. Why are they asking me? No one wants to hear what I have to say. You know, specifically here at Terracon, our president and CEO is a woman. Several of our directors and VPs are women. Why would anyone want to hear from me? I'm just a manager. My next step was to procrastinate. I am the queen of procrastination. I won't even tell you all when I finished writing the speech. But I did finish the speech. Yay me. And I had relief for about 5 seconds. Then those realizations started in that self-doubt. Speech isn't very good. They should have asked someone else to do this. I can't even believe I finished it. It's not going to land well. And then the increased feelings of feeling like a fraud. I'm not really a women leader. Who am I to be giving a speech to actual women leaders? And then the cycle starts all over again. It's probably going on internally in my own head right now as I'm delivering the speech. I can already hear the internal criticisms that are going to come up after I'm done. When I started taking kind of an informal survey of my friends and colleagues to see if they had experienced imposter syndrome, several people were not familiar with the term itself, but once I explained it, they had all experienced those feelings, like a fraud, or feeling that they didn't belong in the position they held. And they elaborated on how they had experienced that and how it had impacted them. This phenomenon is not just happening in the workplace. These feelings of inadequacy can be felt, and feeling like a fraud can creep up in our personal lives as well. How often as mothers have women thought to themselves, I don't deserve to be a mom. You know, I bought cookies to the bake sale instead of making them from scratch. You know, or other ways we devalue our contributions. In fact, according to the International Journal of Behavioral Science, almost 70% of adults have experienced imposter syndrome or symptoms of imposter syndrome. In fact, many notable figures have experienced imposter syndrome. As I've listed on the next slide, my roster of imposters. The great Maya Angelou famously said, quote, I have written 11 books, but each time I think, uh-oh, they're going to find me out. I've run a game on everybody, and they're going to find me out. Howard Schultz, the founder and as former CEO of Starbucks, came up with the concept of Starbucks after traveling to Italy, where he discovered an independent coffee shop and wondered why we didn't have them here. He said that every day he felt like an imposter, because what is a Xerox salesman doing starting a multi-billion-dollar coffee company? I'm sure a lot of you appreciate that he did start that company. Sheryl Sandberg, chief operating officer at Facebook, was giving a speech to Grace Hopper Celebration, which is the world's largest gathering of female technologists. And she said that she was not qualified to be speaking at the conference or even working at Facebook because she didn't have a computer science degree like so many of her colleagues. Even Albert Einstein, one of the greatest thinkers in human history, was reported to have said, the exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think myself an involuntary swindler. One of the reasons I chose this topic is because I've specifically been hearing more and more about imposter syndrome among my family and friends just over the last few months. One of my best friends in high school is a successful African-American OBGYN in Houston. And she was doing mock interviews for students who were applying for their for residency positions. One of the candidates was another African-American female who at the end of the mock interview asked my friend, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? When she described the situation, I was initially shocked by the question. This was a student who had already successfully completed her doctoral coursework and was applying to residency programs around the country, yet she was questioning if she was supposed to be there. A few days after that, one of my cousins posted a similar query on Facebook. Anyone suffer from imposter syndrome in school or at the workplace? If so, what helps you to overcome these feelings of inadequacy? That cousin was successfully pursuing a law degree and had recently completed an impressive internship at a prominent firm in Los Angeles, yet he too was questioning whether he deserved to have that position. Where is all of this coming from? Why do we have these tendencies? And more importantly, how do we combat it and overcome imposter syndrome? One of my friends is a psychologist, and she helped me, it helped her to explain it to me in this way. It's really about how people see themselves. And in the next slide, I kind of started talking about that. Most people see themselves monocularly, which means they only see one aspect of themselves and ignore the full person. That single vision lacks depth perception, and it enables doubt to more fully seep in. One does not believe in the credit or accomplishments or compliments that they are given. They can also be modest to the extreme. They completely devalue their abilities, especially when comparing themselves to others. I personally have 2 master's degrees, but I'm always like, well, I don't actually have a PhD like some of the other people that I know. These people are trying to be, and like myself, I'm trying to avoid seeming arrogant, but then I go to the other extreme, which tends to leave me feeling insecure instead. A more healthy way to view oneself is binocularly, seeing the totality, so you're looking with 2 eyes, seeing the totality of who you are as a person. That involves intellectual humility, being willing to acknowledge your faults, but also balancing that with your strengths. That allows one to establish a healthy amount of self-confidence without falling into conceit. It's also known as humble confidence. On the next page, I'm talking about how people can fall into the trap of imposter syndrome due to external factors, especially around trauma. We all have some element of trauma that we've experienced in our lives. And the bigger the trauma event, the bigger the lie some people tell themselves to deal with that trauma. If you had, say, an overly critical parent who never acknowledged your achievements, that could easily impact how you see your own achievements now. For example, if your parent said, hey, I see you got an A in English, but you only got an A- in science. Hopefully you're going to do better in the future. That becomes your learned response and the lens through which you see your own achievements. You do not acknowledge the amazing things you've done because you focus on those things that you could have done better. Another element is in Western culture, U.S. culture in particular, we have this tendency towards seeing our history in mythological terms, like grander than life, these perfect examples of humanity. But unfortunately, that makes it difficult when we're dealing with our own realities, and it makes it more difficult to deal with our own shortcomings. For example, when children see their parents as these perfect mythological figures who had this perfect marriage, when we ourselves become parents, we only see our failings and how we didn't live up to the example our parents set. However, that view of our parents isn't always the reality. We're just ignoring the history that showed their true humanity, that showed the struggles that they may have had in their parenting, that dismisses the challenges they had within their marriage. One can never live up to that mythology. And we tell ourselves that our heroes, about the mythology we tell ourselves about the heroes, so we will always fall short and not be worthy, thus the imposter syndrome. Another external element that can cause imposter syndrome is when one feels that they don't belong in these systems that were designed to exclude them. This is particularly prevalent among people of color and women because it's not just that voice in their head that's telling them they don't belong. They hear those messages clearly and out loud in society. In some places, it was even codified that blacks and women don't belong in these spaces. The whole purpose of segregation and Jim Crow laws was to tell people of color, African Americans in particular, that they didn't belong in spaces with white people. And the remnants of these systems still exist today. But there are a lot of modern-day examples that promote that same sentiment. Black youth being followed around in a mall, conservative rhetoric about building a wall to keep immigrants out, the desperate treatment of African Americans in the education and criminal justice system, women not being allowed to advance in their careers because they might get married and leave to have kids. The message that we take away from these situations is that we're not designed to belong in these spaces. So no wonder that people experience imposter syndrome. So now that I have thoroughly depressed everyone about imposter syndrome, what can we do about it? There are a lot of effective ways to overcome imposter syndrome. And I'm going to detail some of those on the next page. First of all, you can acknowledge the feelings that you have to acknowledge the feelings that you're experiencing. Next slide. Great. Hi, I'm Monica Curls, and I'm a recovering imposter. My biggest symptom of imposter syndrome for me is fear of criticism. I tell myself I can't do it, I shouldn't do it, and so I don't do it to avoid being criticized for what inevitably would be me doing it inadequately. I have to acknowledge those feelings and deal with those feelings before I can move forward. Other common feelings associated with imposter syndrome are anxiety, that need to be perfect, self-doubt, and fear of failure. Often people rationalize that if you belong somewhere, you wouldn't actually have these feelings. However, everyone has feelings of doubt and insecurity at some point, especially when taking on new challenges and tasks. They may be better at hiding those feelings, but they're there. But the important thing is to move past those feelings that cause hesitancy, move towards feelings that propel you forward, like hope, optimism, gratitude, and success. You must also make an honest assessment of your strengths and weaknesses. This can be super hard because often, once again, that inner voice tends toward criticism. I can come up with lots of my weaknesses all on my own. The positive traits, I'm harder to acknowledge. So one thing I've started doing is pulling out my resume and think about what are the attributes I had to exhibit in order to achieve the milestones that I list. For example, I spent a total of 3 years working in Afghanistan for U.S. government contractors. What did it take for me to be successful in that environment? I had to be courageous, patient, a strong collaborator. I had to exhibit fortitude. I was competent, and I was committed to the task at hand. Those attributes are the same ones that make me a valued asset at any table that I'm in. So how can I leverage those positive attributes to make sure that I'm at that table for the right reason and can make a contribution? It's often challenging to walk into a room where you are the first or the only. It is important to acknowledge that your different experience and knowledge is exactly what makes you uniquely qualified to be at that table. Even at times when people might not have wanted you in the room, your unique perspective is what will eventually bring them to value your presence. Maybe everyone in the room has an MBA, so they have they're strong in their business acumen. I don't have an MBA, but I do have a master's in organizational development psychology, which helps me to understand organizational structures and challenges, which can be very valuable asset when you're dealing with businesses that are especially going through change. So once again, how do you leverage that knowledge that you do have to bring that different perspective into those rooms? I always use the following analogy. Back in the 90s, and I'm dating, when you go into an arcade, some of those arcade games would not accept quarters, even though we all had quarters. You had to have a special token if you wanted the game to work. So if someone put me in a room to be the token black woman, I'm okay with that because you're going to need this token if you want to get things working. It is important to have, as I acknowledge on the next page, It's important to have a strong support system around you who can remind you that you are awesome and that you deserve to be exactly where you are. 6. When I was first asked to give this speech, I went to my boss, who's one of the female directors at Terracon, and I said to her, I don't know why they asked me to give this speech. They should have asked someone like you. He immediately became my cheerleader and said, of course they should ask you. You do a lot in the community. You're very good at articulating your perspective. So it makes perfect sense that you would be the one to give a speech to women leaders. It is important to have people around you who can see those things in you that you tend to brush off or undervalue. They are often at a better vantage point to see all of you, the strengths and the weaknesses. I did not mention to a lot of people that I was giving this speech, but when I did, everybody was excited and supportive, and it definitely lessened my anxiety around speaking today. If you feel that you are lacking in certain areas where you're thinking you might not be qualified, the next thing you can do is try and find those people who are qualified who might help you to be more prepared. There are tons of YouTube videos and articles about imposter syndrome. And so I could have just taken information from there, but I also talked to my psychologist friend, who was more than happy to talk about some of the psychological reasons for imposter syndrome. When I started thinking about people who were the first and only at decision-making tables, one of the first people I went to was a black female politician friend of mine who I know has dealt with some of these pressures before. Lastly, where possible, you should avoid those toxic environments that may be specifically hostile towards your presence. I say where possible because, as I said earlier, sometimes organizations need that token who's going to open the door for more diverse perspectives in the room. However, those rooms can be emotionally and spiritually draining, especially if your presence was forced upon the group. It is important for you to be there, but it's also important for you to have your support team on deck to help you through the situation. However, sometimes those environments are way too toxic, and they have to do more work within that room to prepare the people in that room for different perspectives before they should invite others in. I still experience imposter syndrome sometimes, as I did with this speech. And they tend to be more fleeting moments than stuck in that cycle. One way I tackled this was to be part of my Be Bold, Be Fearless journey. I'd like to tell you about it in hopes that it might inspire you to venture into the unknown. Back in 2019, I decided I was going to focus on the goal I've had since I first worked in Afghanistan in 2002. I wanted to write a book. The book was going to be about some of my experience and my travels, but particularly from the perspective of an African-American woman. I remember writing my first chapter on the plane ride into Kabul in November of 2002. But due to intense work environment and a 6-day work week, I never wrote another word. However, things in my life had calmed down by 2019, where I started thinking about writing again. I decided if I was going to be more disciplined about it, I should at least find an accountability coach who would be the person who would hold my feet to the fire and make me start the writing and keep writing. I identified a life coach, and he spent the first few months getting to know me better so that he could start to help me understand what had kept me from writing the book in the past. We went through my insecurities, my issues with self-confidence and self-image, my avoidance of criticism. I realized the importance of the self-assessment process before I could put pen to paper. During one of our sessions, he asked me, "Tell me about the time that you failed." I really had to think long and hard. I finally was able to say, besides romantic relationships, and I won't even get into that, I really haven't failed. I've not been perfect, of course, but I tend not to do things at which I would fail. He looked at me puzzled for a moment and then said, "Then how do you grow?" Well, once he said that, it was mind blown. I left that meeting a bit off balance. I had grown, right? I had developed an acumen around some specific fields which were my passion. Politics and civic engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, international relations. But my skills and experience went deep into those issues. But I rarely ventured outside of those fields in my personal or professional endeavors, due once again to that fear of criticism and imposter syndrome. Who am I to do something different? I have my lane. I need to stick to my lane. If I wasn't positive that I could do something successfully, then I just didn't do it at all. This had played out so often in my life, even as a child. I remember I gave up gymnastics and ballet because there were younger people who did it better than me. I gave up piano because I didn't play as well as my cousin. I was struggling through chopsticks while he was playing Mozart. I gave up songwriting when I was 12 because I had entered a national songwriting contest and I didn't win. So obviously, if I didn't win as a 12-year-old, I had no skill in this area. If I did not demonstrate a natural ability to do something well from the start, I normally didn't commit to doing it for long. Like I said, I've grown deeper in my fields of proficiency, but I have not really picked up any new skills. My personal growth was limited because of my fear of being seen failing and what others would think of me if I did fail. Later that week, after I talked with my accountability coach, I was talking to a friend of mine about my epiphany, and for suggestions about how I could start being more fearless in my pursuit. During our same conversation, I was telling my friend about how I started doing research on Chris Evans. He was an actor that played Captain America in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I swear this is going to connect. I know it seems kind of weird, but he had a strong political presence on social media, and I was really impressed. It definitely doesn't hurt that he's a talented actor and sexy as hell. My friend suggested that if I was going to be fearless, your goal for 2020 should be to meet Chris Evans. I laughed at that because it seemed completely a ridiculous notion. Why would a Hollywood actor want to talk to a big black woman from Kansas City? However, it made me actually think of a quote I had heard from Chris Evans. He originally turned down the role for Captain America twice, despite the fact that he was an established actor and that he had even played a superhero before. He did not feel like he could take on this challenge. But he thought to himself, quote, maybe the things you're most scared of is exactly what you should do. Maybe this is actually what you should be pushing yourself into doing. So I was inspired. So on the next slide, I started my Be Bold, Be Fearless journey. That next morning, I texted my friends about some ideas to be more bold and fearless and to get the attention of Chris Evans. I leveraged my knowledge and experience to come up with a 6-phase plan to meet Chris Evans. I called on my squad to help me with those things that I didn't have experiences or knowledge about. One of my primary actions was to actually write a song about Chris Evans and record a music video and release it online. Opening myself up to criticism, particularly over my creative endeavors, was especially scary for me. I had never really done it before. I was always rewriting song lyrics in my head, but I had never really shared that with anyone. Writing an original song and releasing it with a video that had me in it online. I remember when I first played the music video for my mother, I braced myself for her criticism. I assumed she would ask, why are you doing this? Or why would you put this stuff all over the internet like that? But her response could not have been more supportive. You did all that? That's amazing. I wish I knew this Chris Evans person so I could make sure that you met him. I had prepared myself for the worst, but it never came. Everyone was complimentary and supportive of the music video. This was not an area of expertise, and I certainly felt like an imposter several times along the way. But I'd still done it, and I'd lived through it. Now, it didn't go viral the way I'd hoped. I'm still waiting to hear from Chris Evans, so if any of you know him, let me know. but I have yet to hear an unkind word about it. I've even written a couple more songs since I've become bold and fearless and released them on the internet as well. So having a success like this in an area, in venturing into an area where I definitely wasn't an expert, helped me to get over that imposter syndrome. Now, of course, it always sneaks back up, but I get through the cycle a lot more quickly now. One of my friends, Alicia Kennedy, who was the black female African-American politician I mentioned earlier, gave me a different perspective on imposter syndrome. She often finds herself the first or the only in rooms where decisions are being made. And what she said to me is, I have found that people are too busy doubting my own abilities as a black woman that I don't have the privilege of self-doubt. I'm too busy having to prove people wrong. This is so true. I have definitely tried to adopt this position as well. I realized that some of my feelings of being an imposter were because people treated me like I was an imposter. I altered my perspective, but I've really tried to alter my perspective. If you tell me that I don't belong somewhere, I'm probably moving in permanently. If you say that I'm not capable of doing something, I'm going to be the best at it and best at doing it. I plan on being too focused on proving the dissenters wrong to have self-doubt. So if you could actually advance 2 slides, well, we can advance 1 slide, so Chris has Chris Evans' quote. And I'm going to say that again because I tell myself this quote all the time. Anytime I find myself, like, hesitating, I say, maybe the thing you're most afraid of is exactly what you should be doing. Maybe this is actually what you should put yourself into. And I use that to propel me forward on a daily basis. On the next slide, I have some parting words from America's first African-American First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama, when she was asked about imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is a thing in your head. It is like an internal characteristic. Much of it is what you practice telling yourself. And if you've heard that you're not good enough, that's what you're practicing. I am telling you it is not true. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be doing what you're doing if you didn't belong here. I could not agree more. And I echo her message today as I close. To anyone who's dealing with imposter syndrome, if you are in the room, you deserve to be there. If you are at the table, you earned your seat. Don't let anyone tell you differently, especially yourself. And once you get there, figure out how to make yourself, your skills and talents, and leverage that to make you invaluable. Once you do that, they will start to affirm that you belong there too. In the meantime, keep a strong squad around you that can lift you up when you start to doubt. Despite my own challenges with imposter syndrome, I'm still a work in progress to overcome it. I celebrate my successes, and I forgive myself when I stumble. And remember that we are all awesome. Go us. So, thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. We've had some great comments. Thank you to all the comments that have come in through the chat. So I'm going to read a couple of comments that came in. My favorite one, this one came in from Tiffany. And Tiffany said, "This is so awesome, Monica. This challenges us to be big and bold. Sometimes we are trying to be bold and fearless, but we don't push our boundaries far enough. So thank you." So that's one of the comments that came in. So I'm going to throw out a couple of other questions that have come in through our chat. The first one that came in from Heather. And Heather says, "I experience imposter syndrome in my personal life. I'm not the Pinterest mom that I pretend to be sometimes. Any advice for me?"
Well, and I think once again, a lot of things that happen online are tending towards that mythology. You know, people are putting their best selves forward. Like the things you see on Pinterest are the perfectly made decorated cakes. Like they don't tell you how many times they had to make that cake to get to there. Like, we're all working. Our first time is not always perfect. So allow yourself to fail. One of my, like, I like to bake, and one of my best cakes that I've ever made, I called my ugly cake because it looked horrible. Like, like one of the layers was a little too thin, so when I put it in the refrigerator to try and help it harden, one of the layers actually slid off onto the door and was sitting on the door. And so when I opened up the refrigerator, like half the cake's on the shelf and half the cake was on the door. So then I just dumped it all in a bowl. And it tasted great. It looked horrible. So I called it my ugly cake. You know, and so I would embrace, like, first of all, what you see on Pinterest is often not achievable. Like, people are putting their best selves forward. They're not putting the struggle that got them there. But embrace those mistakes, because sometimes they're still the best. If you didn't decorate the birthday perfectly, you decorated it in your style. Like, embrace that. You know, like my ugly cake, like I said, it tasted great, and my friends loved it. So, you know, I embrace that. I've made it again. The last time I made it, it actually stayed together, so I didn't have to put it in the bowl. But I still call it my ugly cake because that's where it came from. So I would definitely embrace those. And once again, any failure is a lesson. It's not a failure. You either succeed or you learn. And you know, sometimes those elements and times when you can learn are just as valuable as if you had succeeded.
That's wonderful. Okay, so a couple of questions have come in. All right, I lost count from how many people, at least over 20, have asked about the video. Is it on your Instagram? Is it on your Twitter? If you don't want to tell us, it's okay.
No, it is. So it's on my Twitter. It's actually on both places.
Okay.
So on Instagram, under Be Bold, Be Fearless. It is on the IGTV. I've also done another video that was more kind of my, kind of based on a lot of the racial unrest that happened last summer. So I have a couple of videos on there now. But yeah, the Instagram and on Twitter, I think right now the Chris Evans video isn't the first one. My more recent one is tagged. But if you go through my history, you'll see the Chris Evans one as well.
Oh, wonderful. And Dixie asked, did you ever finish your book?
So my book is still in progress. I have written about 11 chapters, but I started working on some other things that will help feed into the book. So I've kind of pivoted onto something else. And once again, because of last summer, like I started writing it back in 2019, and so when COVID happened and then kind of a lot of the racial unrest happened, I kind of pivoted. So I still have those 11 chapters. I just on Friday talked to a friend of mine who had written a book and was talking to her about what process works better, because she was one of my friends that actually went through a publisher to publish her book. I've talked to some people who self-published as well. And so it is still a work in progress. I'm hoping to make some more progress by the end of the year.
Oh, wonderful. All right, well, we have one more question, and then for everyone, Monica is going to join us for our panel discussion in a little longer. So our final question comes from Anita, and Anita says, any advice on coaching or mentoring a new young lady that's new to the workforce that clearly has imposter syndrome?
I mean, I think the one thing, like, offer to be part of a squad, like, offer to be the one that's her sounding board when she's having those doubts. Because I think, like, particularly, social media has done such a number on people's self-esteem, especially our younger generations. Like I said before with the Pinterest comment, we have held up these really unrealistic standards of achieve, what we can be, what we're supposed to look at like. And that has made things really challenging for people coming into this world where they have these unrealistic expectations of what they were supposed to be by now. And so I think, just kind of be their reality check. Like, the Mark Zuckerberg those are anomalies. Like the Jeff Bezos, and the people who are like millionaires at 20, those are the anomalies. Most of us are just trying to leverage our talents to get to the next step and do things creatively to try and make a difference. And so really just trying to focus them on that, like trying to start $1 billion company, as your first time out. That's not realistic. And I think there are a lot of people out there who have those stories of how long it took them to get success. Like, was it A.K. Rowling, who had like 24 rejections for Harry Potter before someone was willing to look at it? The number of people, those are more typical. And it's really about perseverance. And so, I would just kind of be that reality check for that young person. Those failures can be great lessons as well.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. All right, well, Monica, thank you for that presentation. That was wonderful. And for everyone, Monica's going to be back with us in about 30 minutes. So thank you.
All right, thank you.